which is actually about we love the outdoors and we believe in the Queen's Chain and access to the outdoors as being sort of a right for New Zealanders. And I'm imputing here motives to Matt Lauer in the sense that it's his and he can lock it up from others as much as he chooses to. You've got this clash in these two cultural expressions,
really
and you can understand why there is such cynicism about foreign ownership of land, because
Absolutely.
land is about us.
And also, to bring it back to tangata whenua, with customary title, it's never been about restricting the right of New Zealanders to access, things like the foreshore. And yet we have a very clear example here of a foreign owner who is saying it's mine, New Zealanders can't come into my property.
What he might want to do is look across the valley, and Shania Twain bought land near Wanaka, and she actually opened up the land and put some quite good access there. What was fascinating about her situation was beautiful land again. Her privacy was protected, but actually the local community were very supportive because she knew how to work with the local community. It sounds like Matt needs to learn a lesson or two about how to work with the local communities.
I seem to remember Matt saying that he wanted to emulate Shania Twain when his name was first connected to the sale, and he would probably argue that he has eased up on public access before this controversy arose about the actual road in.
So probably the jury isn't Matt, but actually what the locals are saying. And if the locals are saying, hey, you know what, Matt, you could do a bit more, then I think he needs to listen to them.
Why are we calling him Matt? Are you personally acquainted?
His biggest fan.
Oh.
Not.
Just quickly, at the weekend, Eugenie Sage reiterated that single-use plastic bags will be banned, and of course people say this is low-hanging fruit. People also say good on her, so there are various points of view. Hi Jim, a question regarding plastic bags used in mail delivery. Letters, magazines, charity reports, requests for funds, they are all delivered in little plastic bags now. What has happened to paper envelopes? Michael Lee. Michael's making a very good point. There's endless amounts of single-use plastic bags wrapped around bits and pieces you get in the mail.
And one of the places he talked about was charities using plastic bags, which seems completely in conflict with most charities' objectives. I suspect most charities don't think about it. They've probably contracted it out in the mail and aren't actually realising the damage they're doing to the environment.
A lot of the charities he's right about. Charities do send out things wrapped in plastic. Have you noticed that?
Not Variety, the children's charity. We do not. But I actually haven't. I haven't noticed charities sending out things in plastic, but I've certainly noticed things like, newspapers still in those plastic bags.
Yeah.
So I think that it's a very valid point to bring up, and we just simply need to do better as a society when it comes to plastic.
Given that supermarket bags, I know this is mostly a fait accompli now, but given that supermarket bags, people argue, are by and large not single-use, but that we have a lot of single-use bags and a lot of single-use wrappings in our lives. We're wrapped up in single-use plastic. Is this what we've got to be dealing with as well?
Well, I think you've got to start. You've got to start somewhere, and most plastic that people have probably comes in the supermarket shopping bag, and just simply, if you're going to change behaviour, start at the most obvious place, which probably is the shopping bag.
Makes people think.
Yeah, changes behaviours.
And you'd be prepared to do without them all in your lives, both of you? From what you're saying, you would.
Well, increasingly, just having to, because actually in parts of the country now you cannot get a plastic bag.
Which is a
put your
good
groceries.
thing.
It's a very good thing.
Lizzie Marvelly has been on the panel today. Thank you very much for coming back.
Thank you, Jim.
And so has Chris Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
And interesting to hear the new job described. Must stay in touch about all those charities. That's us. Thank you for your company, everybody. We're back tomorrow, and Checkpoint is on the way.
So Tumara, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, at least 9 people have been shot in Toronto. We hear from an eyewitness. The All Black Sevens team becomes the first men's team to win back-to-back World Cups. Just 24 hours after the same feat by the Black Ferns. Life as a contractor. A New Zealand Post courier driver tells us he reckons he'd be lucky to make minimum wage. And we hear how the New Zealand workforce is increasingly becoming two-tier, with contractors not getting paid leave, sick days or minimum wage protections. A team of Navy divers joined the search for a helicopter pilot missing in Lake Wanaka. And a woman who lost 9 members of her family in an aquaboat tragedy in Missouri said they would have survived if they'd been wearing life jackets.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The chief censor says he has contacted Netflix after an uproar on social media about the trailer for one of its new shows. The series, called Insatiable, has been called toxic and fat-shaming. Its trailer depicts a teenage girl who loses weight when her jaw is wired shut after she's punched in the face, and who then seeks revenge on the people who have bullied her. The chief censor, David Shanks, says unlike previous controversial Netflix shows, Insatiable did not seem to pose the same risk to public harm.
That's not apparent on the face of the trailer for this series, although I totally accept that people will find it objectionable, they'll find it offensive.
David Shanks has asked Netflix for more information about the series, which comes out next month. Netflix has declined to comment. The government has appointed Māori community leader Dr Pauline Kingi to lead the inquiry into the appointment process of Deputy Commissioner of Police Wally Haumaha. Mr Haumaha's appointment was thrown into question after it was revealed he publicly defended 3 policemen accused of rape in 2004. Dr Kingi is a former senior public servant and community leader of 28 years, former chair of Auckland University of Technology and Auckland Regional Director of Te Puni Kōkiri. The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says Dr Kingi's inquiry won't look at the candidate's suitability rather than the process which led to Mr Haumaha's appointment.
The correctness of the process will establish whether other questions arise from that, and suitability may be one of them. But it's the process that people are complaining about. The process has been called into question, and an inquiry into the process is what's happening now.
Winston Peters. The inquiry will look at whether all of the appropriate information was gathered by the State Services Commission before his appointment and what was passed on to ministers. Paramedics in the Canadian city of Toronto say 9 people have been hurt in a shooting. Reports from the scene say the gunman shot people along several blocks of the Riverdale area. A witness told CNN he heard several shots fired.
I heard at least 20 shots in intervals. You know, clip being spent, reloading, clip being spent, reloading, clip being spent. That's what I heard. And then I saw the carnage as I ran down the street here. Pretty crazy. I saw at least 4 people shot here by the fountain.
The man said he saw people from restaurants grabbing towels trying to help those who'd been shot. Reports suggest the gunman has killed himself. The latest reports from Toronto say 14 were shot and 1 person has been killed. A man says he heard a clap on the night Reginald Sharma died from a single punch in the Auckland suburb of Three Kings. Carlos Pulla has gone on trial at the High Court today, charged with the manslaughter of Mr Sharma. Edward Gay reports.
Andrew Faulkner was at the party in the Auckland suburb of Three Kings in August last year. He said there was a scuffle early on in the night and he saw Mr Pulla punched by another man. Mr Faulkner said he and his friends were preparing to leave when he heard a clap sound. He confirmed he didn't see the punch being thrown. Earlier today, the Crown Prosecutor, Fiona Kalaini, said Mr Sharma was punched once in the jaw, causing his head to turn suddenly, splitting an artery in his neck and causing bleeding on his brain. She said 2 other witnesses saw Mr Pulla throw that punch. Mr Pulla's lawyer, Mark Edgar, said the issue will be one of identity. Atu i te ko te mātua, ko Edward Gay aho.
An Upper Clutha community has banded behind searchers who are looking for missing helicopter pilot Matthew Wallace at Lake Wanaka. The search has been underway since Saturday afternoon, where Mr Wallace went missing while flying towards Mount Aspiring National Park on Saturday afternoon. Queenstown Lakes District Councillor Ross McRoby says the community is reeling from the news of Matthew's disappearance.
Feedback over the weekend was one of shock, one of major disappointment to a real likeable gentleman who did so much for the tourism industry, for aviation, and of course being part of the Wallace family, who are major stalwarts of Wanaka.
Ross McRoby says the community has offered searchers food and boating supplies, aircraft support and search vessels. The search is expected to continue for Mr Wallace tomorrow. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the Hurricanes' loose forward Ardie Savea is likely to miss this Saturday's Super Rugby final against the Crusaders in Christchurch. An ankle sprain has sidelined Savea since the All Blacks French series last month. The flanker has been touted as a possibility for this weekend's match, but the assistant coach, Jason Holland, says Savea will likely need another week before he's ready to play again. Apart from Savea, Holland says everybody who played in the Hurricanes' quarter-final win over the Chiefs is available this weekend. The All Black Sevens team are back on top, winning their second major trophy this year. The New Zealand side successfully defended their Rugby World Cup crown in San Francisco, beating England 33-12 in today's final. The All Black Sevens also won gold at the Commonwealth Games earlier this year, and the captain, Scott Curry, says he's proud of the team's success.
It's amazing. I mean, it's pretty hard to put into words, to be honest. I'm just so proud of the boys' efforts over the weekend. We had 4 really tough games. And credit to England, they played really well in that final. But like I said, I'm so proud of how we played.
Scott Curry. And the Wellington Phoenix have snared the signatures of 2 experienced A-League football veterans and former Australian internationals. Mitch Nichols and David Williams have over 350 A-League appearances between them. The Phoenix coach Mark Rudin says the pair will add real grunt to the rapidly forming squad. Nichols has signed on for 2 years, with Williams on a 1-year deal. That's the news.
Militant vegans.
We have decided not to lie low and wait for the storm to blow over. My colleague said to me, this is the North. They want a fight. Let's give them a fight.
Russian spies.
For such places like Siberia or Far East of Russia, this is a question of survival. Everyone has a gun.
And a call for another Māori villain in James Bond.
That world is now starting to look for that kind of actor. That's what that's saying. We're coming onto the frame.
An all-star cast with Philippa Tolley and Guy Espin. A morning report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, taking action to prevent chronic underfueling in female athletes. And after 10, Nelson Mandela's granddaughter on the tremendous resilience shown in his often moving and very personal letters sent from prison. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Taupo, Taumarunui and Taihape. Fine spells and a few showers, showers more frequent and heavier at times from Waikato southwards. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Whanganui to Wellington, also Waitarapa, scattered showers turning to rain later today. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, occasional rain, snow to around 500 metres, chiefly morning and night, clearing in Bulla tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, fine with a few cloudy periods. Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, cloudy periods with occasional showers. Southland and Central Otago, cloudy periods with a few showers, clearing overnight tonight. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers. It's just gone 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you everyone for joining us. Coming up on the program, a 2-tier workforce with an increasing number of contractors not even enjoying the same conditions as the lowest paid employees. That's before 5:30. Victories for the men and the women in the Sevens, that's coming up too. But we're going to begin in Toronto, where at least 9 people, including a child, have been shot. Witnesses report hearing 25 gunshots and say the victims were injured across multiple streets. Police, ambulance and firefighters are still at the scene. The gunman is dead. Witness John Tulloch was out on the street.
I thought it was fireworks at first, because it was a rapid fire, and then there'd be a pause and some more fire. We didn't know what it was. We saw people starting to run in our direction, and I still didn't know what it was, and then more people were running, and so we started running, and we ran down a side street. People weren't yelling, but I think everyone was concerned. It just seemed very surreal, almost like it wasn't really happening, but everyone was sort of moving and going away. It was like it wasn't happening. It was hard to believe it was real.
That's John Tulloch. Jody Steinhauer was having dinner at a restaurant called Christina's when the shooting began.
I've just gotten home to safety, so I'm all right, thank God.
What happened?
I was down with my family in an area of Toronto called the Danforth, which is an area with all the different Greek restaurants, and we were actually celebrating my birthday with the kids and the grandparents. And we were kind of halfway in the restaurant, and then all of a sudden we heard a rang of what sounded like firecrackers. but it was extremely loud, and my partner and I just turned, and then you heard someone say, "Get to the back," and we just got the kids, and everybody went right back to the restaurant and told everybody to get down. And there was a roll-up glass, kind of like a garage door to an outdoor patio, and all you could hear was screaming. And my partner went out front with screaming, and there was a woman coming in off the street yelling, "Help me, help me," and she had been shot in the leg. And they got her into the restaurant onto a bench to safety, and thank goodness there was a doctor in the restaurant, so they just tried to stabilize her while we were calling police and tweeting the media to let them know what was going on. And we were getting little bits of information. I'm tied in with some of the police, and all we can tell you is that 9 people we believe were shot, and the gunman was either shot or committed suicide about 4 doors down from where we were in the restaurant. And we were kept there for a while, and the whole area is cordoned off, and we just wanted to kind of get out and get the kids to safety, and thank goodness we're okay. Everybody's pretty shooken up, but thank goodness we're okay.
Yeah, thank goodness. I can't imagine how shaken up you must be. The woman who came in, obviously she'd been shot in the leg, but she's going to make it. She's all right, is she? Relatively speaking.
Yeah, the paramedics came shortly after, and yes, I mean, she looks like she's going to be okay. From what we can hear, none of the victims were dead. They were all, some were in critical condition, but they're all on their way to the hospital. But it's just mayhem. Nobody really knows. It's just everybody piecing together bits of information, and between the police and the firemen, the paramedics, they've just closed off the whole entire area and just trying to get everybody to safety and figure out what really is going on.
And how long did you have to shelter at the back of the restaurant before you were able to get to safety? Because that must have felt an interminably long time.
Yeah, well, we got the family. I had 2 sets of grandparents and children all at the back of the restaurant. And like I said, my partner went up to help the woman. He brought her inside with one of the restaurant people and got her on the bench. And then I went into the corner behind a post and started tweeting to the media, because that's kind of where I'm connected. And at times like this, we couldn't even get through to the emergency 911 numbers because the circuits were so jammed. So thank goodness through social media I was able to tweet out to reporters to let them know what was going on.
Jody, what are the gun laws in Canada? I know they are very, very, very different from south of you across the border, and I suspect they're actually very like New Zealand. Guns, people don't have guns as a rule, do they?
People don't have guns here, and we've had just an incredible increase in guns this summer, and all they've been talking about it on the radio is just this incredible increase in shootings and how the police have to do something about it. And just last week they announced a huge influx of money to the police force to increase surveillance and police officers and all of that. And with this happening tonight, it's a whole new story. And it's just terrifying. Toronto's a very safe city with, a lot of people from a lot of cultures. But, who knows what really happened? Time will tell. The gunman is been killed or is committed suicide. So, who knows? With mental health these days, you don't really know what the motive is. But it was sure scary. One of the women was pregnant, and there was also a child that was hit and was taken to the children's hospital too.
That's Jody Steinhauer, who was, as you heard, in a restaurant right in the heart of where the shooting was. Toronto police now say 14 people were shot. We're not sure of their status, and the gunman himself is dead. It's coming up to 14 minutes past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. We're going to change the subject entirely now. Contract workers next, but first we very rarely feature sport this side in the program, but this doesn't happen every day or every year. New Zealand is in sevens heaven less than 24 hours after the New Zealand women's team did it so wonderfully. This afternoon the New Zealand men's team defended their title at the World Cup for Rugby Sevens in San Francisco. The Kiwi men became world champs for a third time with a 33-12 victory in the final over England. The same team they overcame in their title-deciding match at the last World Cup, which was in Russia in 2013. Clay Wilson with more on a win that officially completed what everyone is calling a double-double for New Zealand Rugby Sevens.
They'll be cheering back in NZ, no doubt about that. Joas, and they might just be shouting a little bit louder. New Zealand, enjoy.
Enjoyment was an understatement for the reaction of the New Zealand men's sevens team as the final whistle blew to confirm them as back-to-back World Cup winners. Not only had they successfully defended their title, but their success had put a neat all-black bow on a perfect tournament for the Kiwi teams in San Francisco. Having matched the feats of their female counterparts, the jubilation and exhaustion of the New Zealand men's players was clear.
It's amazing. I mean, it's pretty hard to put into words, to be honest. I'm just so proud of the boys' efforts over the weekend. We had 4 really tough games. And credit to England, they played really well in that final. But like I said, I'm so proud of how we played.
Captain Scott Curry led from the front in what was a clinical team effort in the final at AT&T Park, the harbourside home of San Francisco's Major League Baseball team, the Giants. But winning big matches also requires flashes of individual brilliance. After showing speed and then power to score the first 2 tries of the match, Sione Molia said backing up their Commonwealth Games gold medal with a World Cup crown was impossible to put into words.
To be honest, pretty much speechless. To win 2 pinnacle events in the same year, it's just unreal.
Fans back in New Zealand were also revelling in their team's dual triumphs. Glued to the television at the Fitzgerald Sports Bar in Christchurch, Kerry Bloomfield said it was great to confirm this country's status on the World Rugby stage.
Just goes to prove that New Zealand is the best. Well, I think it's been very good. I mean, you know, it must cost New Zealand Rugby a fair amount to send the people over there, so it's good to see them paying back by winning, isn't it?
Winning hasn't been a constant theme for the New Zealand men's team in 2018. While they won gold on the Gold Coast, they finished a disappointing 3rd in this year's World Series, winning just 1 of the 10 events. But veteran team member Tim Mickelson said they retained faith in the direction of the team under new coach Clark Laidlaw.
Clark's come in, he's big on culture and he's really brought the boys together, and he tried different combinations but he really worked hard. We didn't quite get the results, but we just kept on working and sought them to get this result.
Mickelson added that the women's victory had also played a role in his team's success. That inspiration shouldn't come as a surprise, considering the 2 New Zealand teams are now based alongside one another in Mount Maunganui, putting in the hard yards together to take on the world. And Molia was in no doubt it was something which had proved a crucial part in a blockbuster year for Kiwi Sevens.
Centralization's played a big part in the success, just creating a culture and a bond within the players and management as well, getting to know each other on a personal level, both on and off the field, which creates that really strong bond. And then when it comes to game time, and then it's just all go, and then everyone knows that we have each other's back. Back
to back by having each other's back. New Zealand remain the kings and queens of Rugby Sevens. Moti hotaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
18 minutes past 5. The increasing push to put workers onto contracts rather than permanent staff is creating a 2-tier workforce with a growing number of contract workers struggling to get by as they're denied the protections even the lowest paid employees get under law. That's the view of an employment law expert who will feature later on Checkpoint, and of Darian Fenton, a former Labour MP who's now with the Meat Workers Union. Checkpoint has been looking at contract workers, the protections they do and don't get and the costs they have to carry. We've been doing that for the past week and a half. We've been focusing on owner-operator courier drivers, but Darian Fenton says she's seeing contract workers appear everywhere, and if more and more of them end up earning less than the minimum wage, employment legislation will need to be rewritten to offer more of the protections employees get. We'll hear from Darian Fenton shortly, but first, life on an independent contract. After tax and costs, what do you think your hourly rate would be, roughly?
Oh, we do talk about this sometimes amongst ourselves, and we kind of cringe to even think about that, because I would say it would be below minimum wage.
If you're an employer, you can't work for below minimum wage, and you're protected by employment law against that. But if, like that courier driver, you're an independent contractor, those protections don't exist, and you can carry significant costs. Increasingly, one of the most important questions to be asked of an employer about their workforce is along the lines of the one we asked New Zealand Post last week. Are they employees?
They're contracted partners. They're not employees.
New Zealand Post say that, Freightways say that, PBT say that. In short, if a courier arrives at your workplace or your home, they're almost certainly a partner in the business parlance or an independent contractor in somewhat less grand terms. The key word is independent. What does that mean? This morning we spoke to a New Zealand Post driver. He bought his own van. What did he pay?
I got a really good deal, about $35,000.
Right.
With the trade-in, I traded my old one in. So it was about $35,000 after the trade-in.
So as an independent contractor, having bought his own van for $35,000 after trade-in, can he drive for anyone in it? I asked him. Are you allowed to drive for anyone else?
No.
So you are contractually precluded from using the van you bought for any other courier company?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And last Thursday on Checkpoint, we asked Mark Baker from New Zealand Post the same thing. Let's talk about what they don't get as partners, which they would get as employees. Do they get sick leave?
No, they don't get the same terms and conditions as employees.
Do they get annual leave?
Under the agreement structure we have, there is the ability, well not the ability, there's the provision for our partners to take annual leave, and they then put one of their relief drivers on.
Is that independence? This is case law, if someone takes a case. But the employers almost certainly aren't going to. Why would they? And individual drivers almost certainly can't afford to. The literature is unclear, but Employment New Zealand offers one really revealing piece of advice. This is a verbatim quote from the Contractor versus Employee section of their website.
You must focus on the real nature of the working relationship, not just the label the parties are calling it. The courts have developed some legal tests to help you tell the difference. They are intention test, control versus independence test, integration test, fundamental economic reality test.
An internal source at IMBI, speaking only on condition of anonymity, told Checkpoint it's the control versus independence test that's most important here, referring us to a specific IRD interpretation guide for determining employment status for tax purposes. The control test, and again this is verbatim,
examines the degree of control the employer or principal exerts over the manner in which the work is done. A high level of control supports the conclusion that the person engaged to perform the services is an employee.
Independence is defined at the opposite end of the spectrum. Again, this is a verbatim quote.
Independence test examines the level of independence the person engaged to perform the services exerts over their work.
Now, we've learnt that drivers own their own vans but can't use them for other companies. We've learnt that drivers pay for those vans to have company colours and logos, and that drivers pay to wear the company's uniform. But what say the independent contractors want or need time off? Again, we raised that with New Zealand Post last Thursday. Can we talk about their right as independent contractors to work for other firms? If you've invested in Courier Post and you drive a Courier Post van, are you allowed to deliver for other companies?
We do deliver for other companies. I mean, one of the things about being an important member of the community servicing the likes of the online shopping market is that we do take freight for other companies.
Yeah, you do. I'm asking if the drivers can. Can they work independently for other companies?
The terms and conditions that the partners are under does say that if they're providing courier services, that can be for New Zealand Post only.
So they can only work for you?
If they're providing courier services, they can only work for New Zealand Post.
Today we asked a New Zealand Post driver what that means. So if you get sick, what happens?
Basically, I can't get sick. If I do get sick, I have to suck it up and go to work. If I physically can't get to work, they'll put a pace driver on my run probably and charge me accordingly.
Well, they will charge you for your replacement.
Yeah.
And how much? And how much would they charge you?
At pace rates, probably $600 to $800 a day.
Which is more than you're making a day.
Oh, yeah, 2 to 3 times as much, easily, nearly 3 times as much as what I make in a day, probably.
Family bereavement, same situation.
Same situation, yeah. There's been other situations where guys, family had died, and they can't afford to go to the funeral. They can't find a relief driver in such short notice, and pace gets put on their own, and they get charged. Or
they miss the funeral and they work.
Yeah.
And you honestly know of situations where people haven't been able to go to funerals because they've had to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And other situation where someone has gone to funerals and they've just been sent a bill.
Now, all of this is legal if they truly are independent contractors. And Darian Fenton knows this because as an opposition MP, she tried to change the law.
When I was a Labour MP, I had a bill in that would have made sure that these couriers and other vulnerable dependent contractors would have got at least minimum wage. That was voted down twice, actually, by the National Party. So it's a real shame that all these years later, we're still in this situation.
One thing that's changed is that Labour are now in government. And last week, the Minister told us they were looking at the position of independent contractors in what do sometimes appear to be strikingly dependent relationships. So we asked him, what about enforcing the minimum wage, given that some of these people, once their costs have come out, would be working for less than that?
Well, it's something, again, that's something that's worth us considering as part of that work.
And when will the government do that?
So as I say, we want to get into that specific work around dependent contractors next year, but also the work that we're currently doing around the film industry and fair pay agreements could provide us with some ideas to work in that area. But next year, it's definitely on the work program. Once we've worked up some ideas, then obviously we will have to present some potential legislative changes to Parliament, so that's obviously got to go through a process, but it is something that's on our agenda for this term.
It can't come soon enough for the courier drivers we've spoken to over the past week and a half. They may be called independent contractors, but it's feeling pretty dependent to them.
It is quite tough. Not being able, if I want to go on a holiday, I have to plan it 1 to 2 years in advance, save up enough to go on the holiday, and save up enough to pay the person that's going to do my job. So it's not like, the wife and I can go, let's go on holiday next week. It just can't happen.
When did you last have a holiday?
A decent holiday, 2010.
No paid leave, no paid sick days. Darian Fenton, now with the Meat Workers Union, where seasonal work is common, fears that more and more employers are looking at getting workers onto independent contracts without annual leave, sick days and the minimum wage. And she says that's creating a two-tier workforce in New Zealand. Are you hearing cases where people who are so-called independent contractors are earning less than the minimum wage?
Oh, absolutely. And I heard a lot of stories when I investigated this issue, and I've kept in touch with a lot of those people and watched the issue very closely, because what I found when I went to try and introduce a minimum wage for dependent contractors, it was way beyond the courier industry. I mean, there were truck drivers in that situation who bought their truck, mortgaged their house, and weren't earning anything like minimum wage. There's people, well, of course, the people that deliver leaflets. That was always very controversial, but why shouldn't they get minimum wage? But then you see that kind of dependent contracting. I came across a hotel where the workers were being paid by the room and employed as dependent contractors. Years and years ago, aged care workers or home care workers were employed as dependent contractors until the union actually took a case and won that one. So, it's been growing, and all forms of these kind of non-standard work have been growing. And it's something that we do need to confront, because it's not okay that we have one category of workers who have employment rights, who have leave and sick leave and other things, and we have a whole other category of workers who have no such rights.
That's Darian Fenton talking to us earlier this afternoon. It's 29 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. So much feedback continues to come in from people who know, who are or who have opinions about the conditions of contract workers. This one, recontract workers, many apprentices on contract rates. My son doing building apprenticeship, $19 per hour, pay own tax, ACC levy, no holiday pay, sick pay or KiwiSaver. And that's one of the features of contract workers, no holiday pay or sick pay. Do keep getting in touch with us, 2101. There are benefits to being a contractor, claiming fuel costs, home office expenses, depreciation. All of this reduces the tax required to be paid, another person says. That's absolutely right. It does if you're in the fortunate position of earning enough to make a good living, then all of those things are good claims. But lots of the people we're talking to, even after those claims, even after depreciation, even after everything they can claim, are still making less than the minimum wage. We've been speaking to so many people over the past week and a half who are in that category. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Coming up, can New Zealanders utilise high country farm tracks or not? Why access to the Hawea Conservation Park could be cut off completely due to a stoush between the government and American television personality Matt Lauer. A team of Navy divers joins the search for a missing helicopter pilot in Lake Wanaka after the police find wreckage of an aircraft, and a woman who lost 9 members of her family in that aquaboat tragedy in Missouri say more would have survived if the captain had insisted they wear life jackets. All of that and more. Patrick O'Mara next with business news. But before it all, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The chief censor is asking Netflix for more information about a new series whose trailer has caused an uproar on social media. The show, called Insatiable, shows a teenage girl who loses weight when her jaw is wired shut after she's punched in the face and then seeks revenge against the bullies. The online series has been slammed as toxic and fat-shaming. The government has appointed Dr Pauline Kingi to lead an inquiry into the appointment of the Deputy Police Commissioner Wally Homaha. Mr Homaha's appointment has been criticised because he publicly defended 3 policemen accused of rape in 2004. The acting Prime Minister Winston Peters says Dr Kingi's inquiry won't look at his suitability for the role, but at the process which led to Mr Homaha's appointment. A witness has told the High Court in Auckland he heard a clap sound on the night Reginald Sharma died from a single punch. Carlos Pulla is charged with the manslaughter of Mr Sharma in the Auckland suburb of Three Kings in August last year. The Crown prosecutor has said 2 other witnesses saw Mr Pulla throw the punch. Mr Pulla's lawyer says the issue will be one of identity. Queenstown Lakes District Councillor Ross McRoby says the local community has offered food, boating supplies, aircraft support and vessels to help in the search for missing helicopter pilot Matthew Wallace in Lake Wanaka. Police divers this afternoon found what seems to be the wreckage of the helicopter in the lake. The search for Mr Wallace is expected to continue tomorrow. Unitec's governing council has been dissolved after an independent financial advisor found it was heading for deficits totalling nearly $100 million over 4 years. The Education Minister Chris Hipkins today announced he's appointed Murray Strong as Commissioner to address the Auckland Polytechnic's financial difficulties. And a gunman in the Canadian city of Toronto has killed 1 person and wounded 13 others. The police chief told reporters that the gunman has also died. Witnesses at restaurants in the neighbourhood described hearing more than 20 shots. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, which is 27 minutes away. Thank you. People say, talk about chorus, find out about chorus. If you are a chorus contractor, do get in touch with us, 2101. Let's go to business news now with Patrick O'Mara. Patrick, I'm absolutely fascinated by this and I'm delighted you're looking at it. This is the government's self-imposed spending cap. Self-imposed being the key phrase, I guess. Will it hinder its plans to restore rundown public services, and can it unself-impose it if so?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it, John? I mean, in the budget they announced that they would spend an extra $24 billion over the next 4 years than its predecessor, the national government, on rundown public services. And as you know, you've talked to many people in many professions, such as hospitals. They've complained to you about rundown hospitals themselves, the buildings, the ability of their being able to get to appointments because they've not been able to get the people that they need to, or there's not the money to be able to get them for these appointments. So it is a very valid question, and I think that when you get those who naturally support the government, such as the Salvation Army, Auckland Action Against Poverty, unions, some economists, who think that the government is doing the right thing but not actually doing enough because of these self-imposed limits, then there's some real questions that need to be answered, I guess. Now, as you know, under the budget responsibility rules, they're limiting government spending to around 30% of GDP. Now, there is some wriggle room there for them. They could actually, over the next 4 years, their forecasts are showing they're going to be at 28% of GDP. So, look, it's roughly around $6 billion that they could spend and still be below the 30% cap just for this year alone. Now, groups like the Salvation Army say you should use that limit, because what they really fear is if you don't fix these problems and they're allowed to fester or drag on too long, it becomes a legacy issue. And I guess if we go back to the 1980s, when a lot of the changes that took place in many communities where government funding was cut out, what we were left with in some cases, in some communities, were people languishing on the doles for 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 generations. We had health problems, we had many social problems, we had drug problems. And I guess this is what they fear, that these will multiply across a number of areas, such as either mental health services, and of course there's been a big call for that area, but not only them, but also old people, and making sure there are services available to them that they can live reasonably well in as they age.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating. In fact, we must talk to Grant Robertson about this. I know that he has discussed it, but I think it's worth returning to. Thanks, Patrick.
Well, look, and just on that, John, of course, he's not budging on that. He's still sticking to his limits on that, because he keeps saying that he thinks the $24 billion that he's putting in will be enough, but of course he's also got to think about saving for a rainy day, for that unexpected shock that we may get. Donald Trump may lead us to a trade war, for example, and completely blow the global economy.
He may bomb Iran, going from his Twitter feed at the moment. Patrick,
yes.
By golly,
I know.
Give that man a Milo and tell him to go to bed.
He's a very volatile character, there's no doubt about it. And of course, the National Party have got their own advice for the government. They could say that if they did spend less on some of these wasteful projects, which they're throwing in the Provincial Growth Fund, which is a bit questionable, but also things such as the money on more diplomats or even the first-year university fees. Actually, if that money had been better targeted, you could have put that money into some of these rundown public services and everybody would be better off.
Right. Thank you, Patrick. It's a hell of a talking point. We'd love your feedback on it, 2101, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. What happened on the markets today? I haven't caught anything, Patrick.
Down, John, about nearly 1%, down 83 points at 8873. But dollar itself, look, up slightly, was at 68.2 US, 91.8 Australian, and British pence, how can we forget it, 51.9, John.
Patrick O'Mara, thank you very much indeed. It's, what is it, 22.5 to 6. A team of Navy specialists have been called in to help search Lake Wanaka after police divers found what appears to be the wreckage of an aircraft nearly 50 metres below the surface. Matthew Wallace has been missing since Saturday afternoon, when his Robinson helicopter disappeared on a routine trip to Mount Aspiring National Park. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Cold, deep water and bad weather have hampered searchers as they try to find 39-year-old Matthew Wallace, the son of Warbirds Over Wanaka founder Sir Tim Wallace, and his helicopter. The search looks set to continue tomorrow, despite items of interest being found near Stevenson's Island during a sonar sweep. Coast Guard Wanaka Lakes President Jonathan Walmsley says the items were found in depths of up to 50 metres. Unfortunately, he says this is at the limit for police divers, so Navy underwater specialists are now joining the search. It's anticipated the operation will be run from a large barge positioned in Stevenson's Arm.
The area of Stevenson's Island is one that's well known for the wind to funnel. Yesterday, for instance, the wind was anything up to 30 knots, which makes searching the lake and operating on the lake challenging.
Mr. Walmsley says a large item has been identified in the lake and searchers hope to try and recover it soon.
I guess because Matthew is well known to most people in Wanaka and their family is exceptionally well known, there's almost a personal sense of loss and a great desire to come to some sort of conclusion.
Matthew Wallace's family has been helping with the search. His brother, Jonathan Wallace, told Morning Report his family just wants to find Matthew.
The focus at the moment, very much for the family, as it is those that are involved in the search and recovery, is the finding of Matthew and bringing him home. That is the absolute priority. Nothing else comes into mind at this point.
In a Facebook post, Jonathan Wallace says he will never forget his brother and promises to care for his son Arthur and wife Alice. Matthew and his 3 brothers own and operate Minaret Station, a working farm and alpine lodge nestled in the western shores of Lake Wanaka. Queenstown Lakes District Councillor Ross McRoby, who lives in Wanaka, says the community is reeling from the news of Matthew's disappearance.
Feedback over the weekend was one of shock, one of major disappointment to a real likeable gentleman who did so much for the tourism industry, for aviation, and of course being part of the Wallace family, who are major stalwarts of Wanaka.
Mr McRoby says searchers have been offered food, boating supplies, aircraft support and search vessels, and the community remains hopeful that Mr Wallace will be returned to his family so they can lay him to rest. For Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, Tēnei.
We're not going to go very far away from where Tess was reporting from. For decades now, the public has called for increased access to Hunter Valley Station, the only gateway to Hawea Conservation Park. That's intensified recently as the Walking Access Commission and the Department of Conservation are seeking an easement on a 40-kilometre road that winds through the property at the head of Lake Hawea. The Commission says people are being denied access. But a lawyer for disgraced American multimillionaire Matt Lauer, who leases the property, says that's hardly the case. So who's telling the truth here? Can New Zealanders utilise the High Country Farms tracks or not? Tess's colleague, our other Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown, tried to get to the bottom of all of this.
We have done official information requests of the Walking Access Commission, Department of Conservation, Land Information New Zealand, the Commissioner of Crown Lands. We can't find one person who has raised any concerns that public access is being denied.
That's Matt Lauer's lawyer, Queenstown-based principal of Todd and Walker Law, Graham Todd. He says the stoush is a storm in a teacup, with Mr Lauer and his tenants not only complying with all the conditions of the Overseas Investment Officer's obligations, but improving access compared to past lessees. So why then would Federated Mountain Club's president, Peter Wilson, hold this view?
This is the last major South Island high country valley that doesn't have public access. Most of the time, with most of these big valleys in the South Island high country, there isn't a problem with access. Farmers are reasonable or there's public access available. In this case, we have a really extremely unreasonable foreign landowner, and that's why the government has to intervene.
To understand the two divergent views, it's important to know the history. Hunter Valley Station is a 6,500 hectare property in the Queenstown Lakes District. A 40-kilometre track running through its heart links public roads to the Hawea Conservation Park. Its dirt is owned by the government, but since March 2017, it's been leased by the former co-host of NBC's Today Show, Matt Lauer, whose employment was terminated following accusations of sexual harassment. Now the Walking Access Commission and the Department of Conservation are seeking an easement through the property from the Commissioner of Crown Lands to open up the conservation estate to the public. But Graham Todd says that's unnecessary.
Any access has got to work in with the farming operations, and that's what's happened. We have maintained logs. We're not required to, but we've maintained full logs of every person who's requested access, every person who's been granted access, and those few that were declined.
And can you say approximately how many have been turned away because of those farming activities?
I think if my recollection of the logs, reading the logs is correct, there was about 3 or 4.
3 or 4 out of more than 100, he claims. But Walking Access Commission Chief Executive Eric Pyle says that's not the story he's heard.
The access at the moment is not that easy. We have heard that people have been turned away. We'd love to see the data, and it's good to know that it exists. We are aware that there have been signs there, and they've now been taken down, that said no, there was no public access.
If an easement is to be granted, it will mean compensation. Graham Todd strongly believes there won't be any need, as they oppose the measure. But if an easement is granted, then compensation could run into the millions. But Mr Pyle also has a message for Mr Lauer on that front.
I'd like to say to Matt Lauer, become a great Kiwi, adopt the culture, and allow access in a very, very managed way, and let's not go through this compensation process.
He points to the properties of Robert Mutt Lang as an example of what is possible when foreign investors are good custodians of New Zealand's outdoors. The South African music producer owns conservation land near Queenstown and was last year made a walking access champion for opening up public access between Glendhu Bay and Arrowtown. The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, also weighed into the debate today, saying the National Party needs to provide answers about how Matt Lauer was able to lease the land.
It's a further complication of what we've inherited. Doesn't stop, but this is a classic example. And having looked at what information is available at this point in time, including the latest news reports and other correspondence, I can't give you a conclusion as to where things go from here, because it's not within our purview or our control. I do not envisage selling this country out like the last government did.
It is a decades-long dispute, now with the added layer of an American millionaire as one of its players. How it ends is anyone's guess, but what is known is the solution will be anything but simple. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Does anyone use Purview quite like Winston Peters? So much feedback coming in. I just want to, because Sally, it's lovely to hear from you. Sally says a perfect example of sexism in sports reporting. Women's and men's sevens team win same competition on the same day, and your report gives few passing references to the women's success while giving far more detail, focus and airtime to the men's team. Come on, team, I expect more from Checkpoint. The women won yesterday, Sally. They won yesterday afternoon. They smited France, thanks to two of the greatest wingers in the game, full stop. It was an extraordinary performance, covered at length on Morning Report this morning. Checkpoint adores and loves and reveres the Black Ferns, and they have appeared on this program repeatedly. We just think they're fantastic. So it isn't as you described. The men won this afternoon, the women won yesterday. They are both world champs. Quite remarkable. As for feedback on the issue that we're covering at great length, which is contractor workers. My son has got his first job as a pilot overseas, flying a small plane with up to 6 passengers. He has a huge student loan and is responsible for people's safety. He gets paid $16 an hour and has to supply his own uniform and accommodation. Steve, I'm actually incredulous that that's true. That's bizarre. John, my son is an apprentice builder. He's always been employed as a contractor until his most recent job. It's easier for the bosses. My son has to pay for his own ACC, no KiwiSaver contributions from his boss, no sick pay, no annual leave payments. He has to manage all these aspects. The boss got the government subsidy for taking on an apprentice. He had to run a car, which I got him, and slowly build up his own tools. Some he purchased from his boss, who deducted payments from his wage. Says Bella. Perversely, it may be that independent contractors in effect employ themselves. They themselves may be in breach of employment law by not paying themselves a minimum wage, holiday and sick pay, says Greg. Good God, Greg, I hadn't thought of that. I don't know whether you're being facetious or not, but anything's possible. Hi, John. Community-based midwives, LMC, are also contractors to the Ministry of Health. No holiday pay or sick leave. If we want a holiday longer than 7 days, we need to book for 2 weeks either side of the holiday. You could lose 6 weeks' pay for 2 weeks' holiday. We pay our others for cover if we need time off, etc. Unfortunately, being a business owner is an evil necessity if we work in the community. Thanks, Tanya. Actually, we have covered the situation for LMCs, and you're quite right. We've talked to people about that kind of predicament. We really appreciate your feedback. We're getting so much of it. 2101 is the text number. Emails welcome too. The one-punch manslaughter trial of Carlos Pula is becoming a bit of a whodunit. The Crown says Mr Pula was in a fight mode when he uppercut Reginald Sharma, splitting an artery in his neck and causing his death in Auckland last year. But Mr Pula's lawyer said it was a dark night. Witnesses couldn't get a good look at what happened, and his client has a pre-existing wrist injury that means he couldn't even form a fist. Edward Gay has been in court and filed this report.
The Crown prosecutor, Fiona Kalaini, said Carlos Pula had been solidly drinking for hours at a 21st in the Auckland suburb of Three Kings last August. In the early hours of the morning, Mr Pula got into a fight with another guest.
He'd been in an altercation and he'd been pushed over, he'd been hit, he'd been yelled at, and he was in fight mode. He was angry, and he was looking for someone to take it out on.
The Crown prosecutor said Mr Pula's attack on Reginald Sharma was completely unprovoked.
He was minding his own business. He didn't engage in any fighting. He certainly didn't engage in a fight with this man. He didn't provoke him in any way. He was just having a good night, having a good time.
But she said Mr Pula attacked Mr Sharma.
And he uppercut him, or hit him in the side of the face, just on his left side underneath his jaw here. And he swung his head around. and this split an artery in the back of his head.
Mr Sharma's split artery caused bleeding on his brain and he died as a result. Ms Kalani said the main issue in the case will be identity.
Was it this man who did this, as the Crown says? Was it this man who hit Reggie Sharma that night?
She said she would call nearly all the people who attended the party and the witnesses will provide various pieces of the jigsaw.
2 people were able to pick the defendant out of a photo montage. 2 people saw an uppercut, punch or a hook to his face, his mouth, his jaw.
He later told police he didn't go up to the house but later changed his story to say he was only up the driveway a short time to pick up his partner. Ms Kalani said Mr Puller also told the police that he had an injury to his wrist in 2012, which meant he could not form a fist. But Ms Kalani said CCTV footage captured of Mr Puller on the night shows him using his hands.
And you can see for yourself he's holding drinks and he's making fists with his hand and he's clasping his hands with others and greeting them and shaking their hand and so on.
Mr Puller's lawyer, Mark Edgar, agreed that the case will come down to identity. He said many of the witnesses at the party were affected by alcohol and it happened in the early hours of the morning.
And you've got this lovely book of photographs that the police have very helpfully provided. The only trouble is that these photographs are taken in the daytime. And the defence will say to you, this scene looks remarkably different at night.
He said there will also be a battle of the experts as both the Crown and the defence will call witnesses to give evidence about Mr Puller's ability to clench his fist.
The defence says to you, Carlos Puller cannot do that. He cannot make a fist. It's quite what the Crown might say. So you'll be wary of that when that issue comes about.
Mark Edgar said the jury would need to consider whether Mr Puller even had the capacity to throw the punch. The trial before Justice Hinton and a jury is set to hear evidence from 30 witnesses and has been set down for 2 weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gaiaho.
9 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. A woman who lost her husband, 3 children and 5 other family members in an aquaboat tragedy in Missouri believes more would have survived if the captain had insisted they wear life jackets. 17 people died in the accident, including Tia Coleman's children aged 9, 7 and 1. And she says whilst the family was shown the life jackets, they weren't told they'd be necessary. Bridget Burke reports.
Tia Coleman was supposed to be celebrating the end of a week-long holiday in Branson, Missouri with extended family, but instead she'll be returning home to Indianapolis today alone. A last-minute ticket mix-up saw her group of 11 turn up at the wrong boat ramp and given access to the ill-fated Ride the Ducks aqueduct.
The captain did say something about life jackets. He said, above you are your life jackets. There's 3 sizes. He said, I'm going to show you where they are, but you won't need them, so no need to worry.
Despite a severe weather warning indicating a violent storm was imminent, the World War II-style amphibious vehicle still entered Tabletop Lake. But less than half an hour later, it became overwhelmed in heavy winds and 4-metre waves.
When that water came over the boat, I didn't know what happened. I had my son right next to me. But when the water filled up the boat, I could no longer see. I couldn't feel anybody. I couldn't see. I just remember, I got to get out. I got to get out. And I don't know if somebody pushed me or what happened, but I hit my head on the part of the boat. And when I got out into the water, it was ice cold. And I remember as we were going into the water, they said that the lake stays pretty warm, like in the 80s. So I knew, since it being so cold, that I'm close to the bottom. I'm not close to the top. And I just remember kicking and swimming up to the top. And as I was swimming up, I was praying. I said, Lord, please let me get to my babies. I got to get to my babies. I got to get to my babies. And I was kicking, and the harder I fought to get up to the top, I was getting pulled down. And I kept fighting, and I kept fighting. And then I said, Lord, if I can't make it, there's no use in keeping me here.
This video, filmed by a bystander on a wharf, shows weather conditions at the time. And as the Duck's 29 passengers, including Tia's family and 2 crew members, scrambled to get out, these pictures, filmed by a passenger on a much larger riverboat, show the aqueduct being tossed around like a toy.
And so I just let go, and I started floating. And as I started floating, I felt the water temperature change, and it got warmer. And as it got warmer, I knew I was to the top, so I stuck my hand out, and I kept swallowing tons of water. The waves were crashing over my face, and every time I get my head a little bit above water, I scream, "Help, help!" And finally, I came up to the surface, and I saw there was a great big boat out there, like a river boat, and they were, oh my God, they were jumping in, saving people. They were throwing life rafts out to everybody, but I couldn't reach it. I couldn't get there in time, and so somehow I managed to get to the boat. These beautiful people, angels, I don't know who they were. They pulled me up. And when they pulled me up from the boat, I didn't see any of my family.
Tia Coleman was travelling with her husband Glenn, their 3 children, 9-year-old Reese, 7-year-old Evan and baby Aria. Glenn's parents, Belinda and Horace, were also on board, as well as an uncle, his sister and her children. All drowned along with 8 others, including the driver.
The biggest thing that stood out to me is no matter what, I felt like if I was able to get a life jacket, I could have saved my babies, because they could have at least floated up to the top and somebody could have grabbed them. And I wasn't able to do that.
The National Transportation Safety Board is investigating the accident, which will include speaking to the boat's surviving captain. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Let's head from Missouri to the far north of New Zealand. Some famous Ngapuhi protest anthems were used in new ways in Kaikohe today. About 50 people marched down the town's main street, banners flying and placards waving, but this time their anger wasn't directed at the Crown. Hapu members say they're fed up with the leadership of the Ngapuhi Runanga and want a change. Lois Williams filed this report.
It was wahine front and centre in the hikoi to the Runanga building in Kaikohe this morning.
16 hapu enu tikura, and we are adamant we do not have the leadership we deserve.
It's the second march on the Runanga in 6 weeks. Kaikohe lawyer Moana Tuwhare is convening the action with strong backup from the Mangakahia elder Sharon Kaipo and a former acting chair of the Runanga, Carol Dodds. Moana Tuwhare says the Runanga, with Sunny Tau as the chair, has failed its people. She says the Runanga spends the bulk of its annual income of $2.6 million on supporting itself in style, while doling out less than $300,000 to its people living in poverty.
Homelessness has increased, third world housing conditions are everywhere, health statistics are getting worse, and our marae are falling down, and it's just not good enough.
Carol Dodds spent some time as acting chair of the Runanga, while Sunny Tau served a sentence of community detention in 2016 for shooting protected kereru. She says it concerns her that the Runanga is shaping up to control the eventual Ngapuhi treaty settlement by forming a new iwi-wide entity to manage it. Mrs Dodds says the Runanga is not fit for that role because it doesn't truly represent the mini hapu of Ngapuhi. She says it's time the old guard moved over to make way for new, younger leaders.
They do have the qualifications, they have the experience, they have the tikanga, the LAW and the LORE, they have that in balance. They're ready to go. We need to start, us older ones need to step aside, let the young ones through, and we'll walk with them and guide them.
Mr Tau and the other trustees were not in Kaikohe today for their regular board meeting. They were in Auckland for a meeting with their lawyers. But one trustee, Mary Mangu, told RNZ that if people want to challenge the leaders, they should follow the correct processes through their takiwā or districts and vote them out.
My understanding is that there was no challenge to the current leadership from any other takiwā. So the processes are there. They're just not being used, they're being ignored, which is a real problem.
But the hikoi leaders say those processes don't work because some of the Runanga's trustees have been foisted on takiwā who don't want them and not democratically elected. The hapu will be back to protest at the next Runanga board meeting in 6 weeks' time, but Honi Mihaka is exhorting them to bring their mates. Unless they can marshal more numbers, he says, the Runanga will simply laugh at them. In Kaikohe for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Thank you, Lois. It's about 50 seconds away from 6 o'clock. We've got a lot of feedback coming in. We're starting to get feedback from people who are tax lawyers, tax experts, and that's where we're going to talk, where we're going to turn to next. There's a couple of you who've contacted us tonight. I'm not going to use your names, but I am going to give you a call tomorrow, and we really look forward to talking to you. We are also starting to hear from people in other fields of endeavour who describe themselves as contract workers when really, prima facie, they seem to have a permanent employment relationship. Do text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We do appreciate hearing from you. It's coming up to 6 o'clock, and Katrina is standing by with the news. After the news at 6, we're going to Syria, and we're going to look at other places.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The chief censor says the trailer for a Netflix show that's been criticised as fat-shaming trucks in cliches but isn't as harmful as previous releases from the company. The series, called Insatiable, has been labelled toxic and has been slammed online by people for its depiction of a teenage girl who loses weight and then seeks revenge on her bullies. The chief censor, David Shanks, says the show from the US streaming service has a stereotyped story.
Now, what's happening in social media is people are calling that narrative out and saying that's not really the sort of body-positive presentation that actually we're coming around to accept as normal and healthy in society today.
David Shanks has asked Netflix for more information about the series, which comes out next month. Netflix has declined to comment. Unitec's governing council has been dissolved after an independent financial advisor found it was heading for deficits totalling nearly $100 million over 4 years. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, today announced he's appointed Murray Strong as Commissioner to address the Polytech's financial difficulties. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Chris Hipkins says Mr Strong's experience will be crucial to turning around Unitec's finances and putting it on a sustainable path. He says he'll appoint an advisory group once the Commissioner has identified the skills and experience needed to support him in exercising his functions, duties and powers. Mr Hipkins says the government is committed to ensuring top quality vocational education and training is available at Unitec. Atu i te whare pārimata, ko Chris Bramwell aho.
A gunman in the Canadian city of Toronto has killed 1 person and wounded 13 others. The police chief told reporters that the gunman had also died. Witnesses at restaurants in the neighbourhood described hearing more than 20 shots. CBC reporter Natalie Nanowski has been speaking to eyewitnesses.
A lot of them told me that they lived just a block or two down from the Danforth and they were able to hear those gunshots that rang out, and they ran to the window to look to see exactly what was going on. They say that's when they saw a man pointing and shooting, that he was firing inside restaurants. After that, they did see a young girl get removed. Right now, it's still very much an active scene. This entire area is taped off. Police very much walking around, all with bulletproof vests.
Natalie Nanowski reporting. The Lake Wanaka community has banded behind searchers who are looking for a missing helicopter pilot. Matthew Wallace was reported missing on Saturday afternoon while flying towards Mount Aspiring National Park. A search was called soon after, and he has since been joined by the Royal New Zealand Navy. Queenstown Lakes District Councillor Ross McRoby says the community is reeling. Mr McRoby says the shock has not stopped the community from offering searchers food and boating supplies, aircraft support and search vessels. The Police National Dive Squad has found what appears to be the wreckage about 47 metres below the surface of Lake Wanaka. The search is expected to continue for Mr Wallace tomorrow. Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters says the debate surrounding public access to Hawea Conservation Park is another example of the complications inherited from the previous government. The Walking Access Commission and the Department of Conservation are seeking an easement through Hunter Valley Station to allow vehicle access to the conservation park. American TV personality Matt Lauer owns the lease to the station. Winston Peters says the government needs to front questions over how such a deal was able to be struck.
Having looked at what information is available at this point in time, including the latest news reports and other correspondence, I can't give you a conclusion as to where things go from here, because it's not within our purview or our control.
Winston Peters says this government will not sell the country out like the last government. Mr Lauer's lawyer says the public has been allowed access since he took over the property last March and the easement is unnecessary. An Auckland boatie has been fined more than $17,000 after running over a diver. Carl Allen Whiteman pleaded guilty to causing unnecessary danger or risk to a person and was sentenced in the North Shore District Court today. The diver was spearfishing between T Point and Omaha in February last year when Whiteman failed to see a dive flag and ran over him. The diver suffered deep cuts to his head and a broken arm and was unable to work for 12 months. Maritime New Zealand spokesperson Neil Roworth says it could easily have been fatal. He says the skipper, who was inexperienced, was speeding and didn't keep a proper lookout. It's 6:05. Sport. The veteran team member Tim Mickelson says keeping the faith in the direction of the New Zealand men's sevens team under new coach Clark Laidlaw was crucial to their World Cup success. Repeating the feat of their female counterparts, the New Zealand men today defended their World Cup crown with a 33-12 win over England in San Francisco. Despite the victory and winning gold at the Commonwealth Games in April, the team finished a disappointing third in this year's World Series. Mickelson says they kept believing in what Laidlaw had created within the squad.
Clark's come in, he's big on culture and he's really brought the boys together and, he tried different combinations but he really worked hard. We didn't quite get the results but we just kept on working and saw them to get this result.
Tim Mickelson. The Melbourne Rebels have been embroiled in yet another off-field controversy, with 2 players suspended indefinitely over an alleged assault outside a nightclub. Pone Fa'amasili and Hunter Paisami have been stood down, pending the outcome of a police investigation into the incident in the early hours of Sunday morning. The Rebels confirmed the pair had been stood down and that Rugby Australia had been made aware of the developments. It comes just a week after a fight between departing Rebels players Amanaki Mafi and Lopeti Timani led to $15,000 fines for both. And the Wellington Phoenix football team continues to add players to their squad ahead of the new season. The Phoenix have snared the signatures of former Australian internationals Mitch Nichols and David Williams, who have over 350 A-League appearances between them. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights we hear from some gifted young movie directors who've got their work into the International Film Festival. Mark Rogers has Americana from all over the place during Nashville Babylon, and our sportscaster Dana Johansson offers her thoughts on who should be the next New Zealand netball coach.
G'day, Karen. How you going?
Good. How's it with you?
Oh, really good. Thanks, mate. Really good.
There's lots going on because you got a new single out today.
Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah, we're really happy to have released a new tune called Trickle Down.
New music every night on Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
What great taste they have. Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel Peninsula, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Fine spells with a few showers. Showers more frequent and heavier at times from Waikato southwards. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Whanganui to Wellington, also wide at upper. Scattered showers turning to rain later today. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, occasional rain. Snow to around 500 metres, chiefly morning and night, clearing in Bulla tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, fine with a few cloudy periods. Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, cloudy periods with occasional showers. Southland and Central Otago, cloudy periods with a few showers, clearing overnight tonight. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
A lovely text came in before saying how beautiful your top is, Katrina.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. Thank you, whoever sent that in.
Thank you.
6:08, as Katrina said. Māori community leader Pauline Kingi has been appointed to lead the inquiry into the controversial appointment of Deputy Commissioner of Police Wale Haumaha. The process that led to Mr Haumaha getting the job will be investigated in light of comments he made in defence of 3 policemen accused of rape in 2004. The details of this will be known to many of you, of course. The inquiry led by Dr Kingi will start on August 6th and run for a maximum of 6 weeks. The Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters says Dr Kingi's inquiry won't look at the candidate's suitability, rather the process which led to his appointment. Mr Peters was asked by reporters at Parliament whether the claim that Mr Haumaha had a former association with New Zealand First would be part of the inquiry.
Well, if it was part of the process, it may well do, but I'm not going to foreclose on Dr Kingi's means of going about finding the relevance of that question towards the process or what her conclusions might be.
How much will the inquiry cost?
Well, I can't give you that figure at the moment because we don't know the final cost when it's all over, but we should think it'll be something within $150,000. It might cost much less. Perhaps it might cost more depending on the request from the inquirer.
Is there any scope to look at the candidate's suitability outside of this particular inquiry if the inquiry is not going to look at that?
No. What the inquiry is going to look at is as to the appropriateness and the propriety of the process. And you would assume that if that is done, then the issue that you're talking about may well arise. But it's not for me or anyone to specify how Dr Kingi might go from the processes which he's on of inquiry to the issue of suitability. You'd expect, though, that the question you're asking would be answered after the first aspect has been properly looked into.
That's the Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters talking at the Monday Post-Cabinet Media Conference a couple of hours ago. A new survey out from the Salvation Army has found nearly half of New Zealanders have opted to go cold at some point in the last year because they couldn't afford to turn a heater on. The survey, released to coincide with the Army's annual winter appeal, is a hard read, also finding nearly 1 in 4 people worried they won't have enough money to pay for their groceries while they're going through the checkout. And the Sally's head of welfare services, John O'Bell, says the most shocking stat for him was that 1 in 10 people say they use their oven as a heater.
And look, the other one was 44% of people not going to the doctor when they need to go, once again, due to the cost. So, look, this is surprising for us because this is talking about a big proportion of New Zealand society, not just a few down the real poverty end. This is middle-class New Zealand that's struggling this winter.
And this survey is a snapshot of the entire country, or at least tries to be. We're not just talking about main centres like Auckland. This is all of New Zealand.
No, that's right. So, look, this survey was an online survey, had good representation from a gender perspective, from an age 18 plus, and across the region. So this is representative across New Zealand.
And that 44% number of people who didn't go to the doctor in the last year when they or a family member was sick, it kind of makes the whole thing a double whammy as well, doesn't it? Because you have people who aren't heating their homes properly, and so they're more likely to get sick, and then they get sick and they can't get better when they go to the doctor, and it's just...
Look, absolutely. So, all these, we ask some specific questions around heating, around food, and around and shelter. And look, what we believe at the Salvation Army is nobody should have to choose these basic human rights, but people are. They're going without meals. They're not getting the right heating, and so this is having detrimental effects on health, on education, on a whole range of things because they're missing out.
Yeah, people skipping meals. You said the Sally's, your survey found 37% of people had skipped a meal in the past year because they couldn't afford to eat. So this is literally people choosing to eat or spend that money on something else.
Absolutely. So they're paying, 37% of people are choosing to pay and spend the money on their bills rather than eating. We hear families coming into our centres that are going, parents are going without to ensure their children have got all that they need. And look, and a lot of single people as well. This is just a common way of survival now over winter, is that they'll skip a meal and hope that money saved would be able to go and pay off a rent payment or a doctor's bill or whatever it may be. They've got to pay for that month.
This isn't anything particularly new from the Salvation Army, right? We've had lots of these surveys, usually around the same time of the winter repeal, and more or less they are saying similar things. And if it's not getting better, if anything, it's getting worse. But does it still surprise you every year that in a country like New Zealand we have 44% of people not going to the doctor, 45% not heating their home because they can't afford it, and some people using their ovens because they can't even afford a heater?
It doesn't feel like we're making much of a dent, and I suppose that's what's frustrating and surprising at the same time. So, and for the 20 plus years that I've been working with people, visiting families in their homes, this hasn't got better.
That's the Salvation Army's Head of Welfare Services, John O'Bell, speaking to Checkpoint reporter Zach Fleming. Fairly striking statement for him at the end that he's been doing this for 20-something years and it hasn't got better. It's 14 minutes past 6. At least 14 people, including a child, have been shot in a busy neighbourhood in Toronto, Canada. Police say one person was killed and the gunman himself is dead. Grace Lee from Reuters has filed this report.
The sound of gunshots ringing through a busy Toronto neighborhood.
I thought it was fireworks at first.
At least 14 people were hurt by those shots, including a young girl, and one person was killed. That's according to police, who say the gunman is also dead.
We didn't know what it was. We saw people starting to run in our direction, and I still didn't know what it was, and then more people were running, and so we started running and we ran down a side street.
Local news reports quote witnesses who say they heard about 25 shots in total, starting at 10 in the evening. Victims have been sent to various hospitals around the city. It happened in a busy neighborhood in Toronto's East End, filled with restaurants and usually packed with people on summer nights. Neighbors described the scene to local reporters, saying they heard the shots, followed by screaming. A second round of shots followed.
It just seemed very surreal, almost like it wasn't really happening, but everyone was sort of moving and going away. It was like it wasn't happening. It was hard to believe it was real.
It's coming up to 60 minutes past 6. That was John Tulloch ending that report from Grace Lee for Reuters. Let's go to sport, and a pretty extraordinary weekend for our women's and men's sevens team. The All Black Sevens have become the first men's team to win back-to-back World Cup Sevens titles. Just 24 hours after a win by the women's team, the Black Ferns achieved exactly the same thing. The men's team beat England 33-12 in San Francisco to win the title after a thriller semi-final against Fiji. By golly, that was a great game. Sione Molia scored 2 tries in the final to help his team to victory. He stole the hearts of the crowd afterwards when he unlaced his boots and gave them to a young fan amongst the spectators. He spoke to our sports reporter Clay Wilson shortly after the win and said, well, basically he was lost for words.
To be honest, pretty much speechless. To win 2 pinnacle events in the same year, it's just unreal.
And I guess on a personal level, to score 2 tries in a final, what does that feel like? Would you have ever believed that would happen?
Nah. Yeah, again, speechless. Just tucked the ball in and just carried, and the rest was history.
In terms of the performance of the team, it was a really clinical performance. Is that what it felt like? It looked like out on the field you all had a real sense of what was required in that game?
Yeah, it was. Leading into the game, we planned to be clinical because it was something that we worked on throughout the year, and just getting the little details right. Because for some games it really let us down, and yeah.
You mentioned there about winning 2 pinnacle events. So that Commonwealth Games performance, how much confidence did that give you for this tournament?
A lot of confidence. I guess if anything, those are the tournaments that we plan to win this year and do well, and doing well in the World Series as well, and to win them both is a huge achievement for us.
In terms of the final today, what was said at half-time? Because obviously it could have still gone either way, just 7 points in it at half-time. Was it a sort of a calm half-time talk?
Oh, yeah, it was. I guess I was just looking after the ball, again, sticking to our structures and not going out of it, and just being calm. It was pretty much it, yeah.
and that feeling at the final whistle, where were you and what did you do and what was that feeling like?
Guess, yeah, it was just speechless. Couldn't stop cha-hooing. It was the exact same feeling as we did in the Com Games. Yeah, it's unreal.
Obviously going back to back and followed in the footsteps of the women as well, so how much, I guess, inspiration, or did you feel any pressure after what the women did yesterday, winning their final?
No, not really. Guess we were just told, like, as a team, and just to play our game, stick to our structures, and execute the details they've been trying to achieve throughout the whole year.
Did you take any inspiration out of what the women did? It must be awesome, you know, being over there in a place like San Francisco, so far from home, seeing another New Zealand team well and wanting to do the same, I guess.
Oh yeah, it always is. Guess if one team does really well, I guess as a country really want to try and back it up as well, and then yeah.
Sione Mulia speaking to our sports reporter, our excellent sports reporter, Clay Wilson. I think that would be the first time that the phrase "I couldn't stop cha-hooing" has been used on Checkpoint. Magnificent. World champions. The men today, the women yesterday. Quite extraordinary. Sevens. Boy, oh boy, we're good at that. Right, it's 20 minutes past 6. US President Donald Trump says it's looking more and more like his campaign for the 2016 presidential election was, and I quote, illegally spied upon. This report in from Chris Dignam of Reuters.
President Trump, in a series of Sunday morning tweets, once again slammed the investigation into Russian meddling and claimed without evidence that it was looking more and more like his 2016 campaign had been illegally spied on. The tweets come after his administration released top-secret documents related to the surveillance of his former campaign advisor, Carter Page. Referring to the Page documents, Trump said, as usual, they are ridiculously heavily redacted, but confirm with little doubt that the Department of Justice and FBI misled the courts. Witch hunt rigged, a scam. But what Trump didn't mention on Sunday was how the documents laid out why the FBI was interested in Page. According to the surveillance application filed in October 2016, the FBI said it, quote, believes that Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the Russian government. It also said Page, quote, has established relationships with Russian government officials, including Russian intelligence officers. Page has denied being an agent of the Russian government and has not been charged with any crime. Republican lawmakers have contended that the FBI made serious missteps when it sought a warrant to monitor Page, the main criticism being that it used material from the Christopher Steele dossier without telling the court that the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign had funded the research.
The dossier has proven to be a bunch of garbage.
Last week, a federal grand jury charged 12 Russian intelligence officers with hacking Democratic computer networks in the most detailed U.S. accusation yet that Moscow interfered in the 2016 election to help the Republican candidate. Trump finished his string of tweets on Sunday by again arguing the summit in Helsinki was actually a success, saying, I had a great meeting with Putin and the fake news used every bit of their energy to try and disparage it. So bad for our country.
Dignam from Reuters talking about President Trump's tweets. Well, another one. He used a social media platform to air his grievances directly to the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani. He tweeted, never, ever threaten the United States. This is all in capitals. Never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer the consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. Capitalised a tweet that's just gone out from President Trump. It's difficult to work out where that kind of rhetoric is going to lead to. 23 minutes past 6. The British founder of the Syrian civil rescue force known as the White Helmets is delighted more than 100 of them have been led to safety by Israeli troops. There were fears the group and members of their families were about to be captured by Syrian government forces. The White Helmets describe themselves as volunteers trying to save lives. The Assad regime says they support rebels and jihadists. The BBC's Mark Lowen is in neighbouring Turkey.
Rescuing the rescuers. Syrian civil defence volunteers and their families evacuated into Jordan and to safety. Pictures filmed by the Israeli army show its troops escorting the white helmets from the Syrian border, escaping Assad regime and Russian forces. Israel's Prime Minister said it was an urgent international operation.
The lives of these people who have saved lives were now in danger. I therefore authorise the transfer via Israel to other countries as an important humanitarian gesture.
They'll now be resettled in Britain, Canada and Germany. The Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, called the white helmets the bravest of the brave, adding, in a desperate situation, this is at least one ray of hope. In the hell of Syria's war, the white helmets have often been the first on the scene, pulling victims from the rubble of airstrikes, administering first aid when hospitals are bombed. Nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, the volunteers say they've saved over 115,000 lives. 260 white helmets have been killed. But President Assad calls them jihadists, as Syrian government and Russian forces surround opposition areas of southwest Syria. Civilians and fighters have been bussed to rebel-held Idlib in the north. But the regime refused to let the white helmets join them. As Assad forces, backed by Russian air power, close in on southwest Syria, resistance is crumbling. And the medical lifeline of the white helmets has been cut.
That report from the BBC's Mark Lowe and Philip Paxton saying he loves sports interviews on Checkpoint. We find the Sevens players in particular, Sione Mulia was fantastic. We find the women. We did an interview with Portia Woodman after they won the Commonwealth Games gold, and she was just brilliant. I mean, you're just hanging on every word. And they're very different from the 15s players, particularly the All Blacks. The All Blacks sound like they've rehearsed every word in front of a focus group, and there is a committee of 200 people vetting every tired old cliche trotted out with mate every third word, whereas the Sevens players just speak as if they were ordinary human beings having a conversation about the game they love. Yes, we agree with you, Philip. They're delightful to deal with. Anyway, enough from me on sports interviews. Let's go to another form of pop culture. I guess it's not even available for streaming yet, but Netflix's new show is already being slammed as toxic and fat-shaming. The American program Insatiable will be launched internationally next month. It features an overweight teenage girl who gets punched in the face and slims down as a result of having her jaw wired shut. Hamish Cardwell has this report.
Having my jaw wired shut lost me more than just my summer vacation. Now, I could be the former fatty who turned into a brain. Or an athlete. Or a princess. No, I'd rather have revenge.
The 2-minute trailer shows the slimmed-down main character punching people and setting one man on fire as she attempts to get back at those who have bullied her about her weight. Since the trailer launched on Friday afternoon, it's prompted criticism of the show's portrayal of fat people. A Facebook post by Netflix New Zealand and Australia has drawn 1,300 comments, with many blasting the program. And an online international petition calling for it to be banned has more than 87,000 signatures. Dr. Kat Pause, a Massey University senior lecturer and fat studies scholar, says she's disappointed the streaming service is planning to air the show.
It's reinforcing negative stereotypes around fatness. It is normalizing bullying. It's encouraging eating disorders. And it is yet another kind of sad, fatty trope. And those are just so tired.
Nisha Apana, who commented on the Facebook post, agrees it's a tired old cliche. She says it's dangerous considering New Zealand's high suicide rates.
They don't have to keep playing this narrative that does make some people feel really bad about themselves. And I also understand the idea of wanting to go back and get revenge. That could be fun, I suppose, for the right sort of person. But I don't know, they can go about doing all of these things and putting through that message and it being really satisfying without playing to all these ridiculous stereotypes.
Nisha Apana says she won't be watching the series. Netflix describes Insatiable as a dark, twisted revenge comedy, which also explores themes such as bullying, eating disorders, and coming of age. It stars former Disney actor Debbie Ryan in the starring role, with Alyssa Milano playing one of the main characters. In a social media video about the controversy, Milano says the show is intended to be satire.
If you can look at it as a conversation instigator, which I think the trailer alone has definitely done, much like these 12 episodes we're judged by a 2-minute trailer, we also tend to judge people at first glance.
The chief censor David Shanks says unlike controversial Netflix shows such as To the Bone and 13 Reasons Why, Insatiable does not seem to pose the same risk to public harm.
That's not apparent on the face of the trailer for this series, although I totally accept that people will find it objectionable, they'll find it offensive, and I have read comments that from some commentators that the themes presented in the trailer puts pressure on the mental health of young viewers.
Mr. Shanks has asked Netflix for more information about the series. Netflix declined to comment, but in a post on social media, the show's creator, Lauren Gussis, says it's a cautionary tale about judging people based on how they look. She's asked for people to give it a chance. Insatiable launches on August 10. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell tēnei.
Philip Padston said he was being sarcastic about sports interviews. But then Tanya, well, we like hearing from you, Tanya. You're a delight. Said, I remember Philip Padston from BFM in the 90s. Very funny and talented. It's lovely knowing he's out there listening to quality radio. Well, we're delighted to have you both, Tanya and Philip. Whatever you think of sports interviews, Philip. Sports interviews make the world go round, don't they? That's Checkpoint for tonight. On behalf of our excellent sports-loving team, thank you so much for being with us. Have a wonderful evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The chief censor says an online show that's been criticised as shaming overweight people is full of clichés, but is less harmful than previous Netflix releases. The Navy is joining the search for helicopter pilot Matthew Wallace, who went missing while flying over Lake Wanaka on Saturday. A government-appointed commissioner will take over at Unitec after the Auckland Polytech was found to be facing multi-million-dollar deficits. A remand prisoner remains on the run after escaping custody while at Hutt Hospital near Wellington. And in the Canadian city of Toronto, one person is dead and a young girl is in critical condition after a mass shooting by a gunman who has since died. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Pick and Mix on RNZ Concert this week features good times.